This is Coffee with Kelly, a dynamic podcast that's dedicated to driving positive change in school safety. I'm your host, Ethan Woodman, Product Marketing Specialist for Crisis Go, and I'm joined by my esteemed colleague, Kelly Moore, Senior School Safety Specialist for Crisis Go. Our mission is to empower you with essential knowledge, tools, and inspiration required to foster a safer and more secure school environment. We hope this podcast will be the catalyst for transformation in your schools. Join us as we continue to dive into the world of school safety. Good morning, Kelly.
Good morning, Ethan. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Allergies are getting the best of me, as you know. So we're pushing through it.
Awesome. We love pushing through things.
Yeah. So I guess we'll start off with the article of the morning. I'll first start off with the school related one.
Okay.
So on Monday, so this was only 2 days from when we're recording this, a gun inside of a third grader's backpack went off in a classroom in Virginia on Monday morning.
Does it say whether it was just sitting there? What caused it to go off? Does it say? Was he messing around with it?
I haven't seen anything. Maybe it was a SIG P250 or something, but I don't. There's all this stuff about those things going on themselves when they drop. So that was the joke. I don't think they're actually 250s. I think they're like another model up. But anyways, that's a pretty funny thing.
Only if you know.
only if you know.
Yeah.
All right. So no, I don't see anything like that. So I don't know why it went off. I have no idea. That gives you no indication of anything like that. So the interesting thing here is it says once the gun was discharged, the teacher evacuated all 26 students from the classroom and notified the school resource officer who was on site. So the interesting thing here is typically when we hear, if we were to hear a gunshot, right, the procedure is lockdown, right? It's your locks, lights, out of sight procedure. And that's typically staying within your classroom. So now we understand the teacher must have understood that the shots were coming from within the classroom and then made the decision to evacuate, which would typically go against protocol. But it was in the classroom. So it changed. So I guess my question to you is, did the teacher do the correct thing here?
The quick answer to your question is yes, he did the correct thing.
Yeah.
But here's why. Everything, every circumstance, every situation that we talk about in safety is dependent upon the circumstances and the conditions and the environment that you're in. So while the standard protocol is to issue a lockdown, what is the purpose of issuing a lockdown?
To isolate or limit the movement.
It's protect kids, right?
It's a protective action.
Yeah.
All those things, I guess, could be.
The object of a lockdown is to isolate the kids from all kinds of things, to restrict movement, to limit the number of people who are exposed to the gunfire, isolate the shooter out of the classroom. So you remove those targets from inside the classroom and so forth. But now you have a circumstance where the incident is occurring in the classroom. Once you have shots fired, other than sending everyone into a protective action, what is the next order of business?
After you've gone into that protective action, it's...
Generally speaking, right? your next order of business, our normal situation, somebody's walking down the hallway or walking into the building, right? Once you get everyone into a protective action, what's your next order of operation?
Hide. Don't come out until someone that you know is telling you to.
Overall, you want to isolate the shooter,
Sure, sure. Yeah.
right?
Sorry, I was thinking from the teacher perspective.
Yeah. So I mean, operationally, we want to make sure as many people are protected as we can and
Mhm.
isolate the shooter. So what we have here in this specific circumstance is a teacher who acted quickly and isolated the shooter.
Hmm.
If the teacher isolates the shooter and the backpack containing the gun, is there a need to issue a protective action, a lockdown? You could argue either way.
Yeah.
So if you have the shooter isolated before, I mean, objectively, it's much better to isolate the shooter, stop the killing, right? That's our order of operation. Stop the killing, stop the dying, start the recovery, right? Generally speaking, what we do to stop the killing is remove the targets or access to the targets, the students,
Hmm.
right? In this case, we removed or isolated the shooter so quickly that it may not be necessary to isolate or protect everyone else. You can hear my dogs, huh?
Yeah.
Let me go move them out. We have to ask ourselves in an incident like this, what are the overall objectives? And we've talked about this before. It's stop the killing, stop the dying, start the recovery. And a general overview of how we approach active shooter or active violence situations, we typically hit the panic button or the lockdown, and we stop the killing by isolating all of the potential targets, right? And we isolate them by limiting their access or access to them. And that's the first order of business. That's the first objective, is to stop the killing, right? So in this case, the teacher, even though I believe there was nobody injured, but in this case, he isolated the shooter to the point where the killing had stopped. So you have to ask yourselves a question: is there a need? And to answer that question, we have to look at one of my primary go-to questions, essentially orders that I have, is what if that fails? So what happens next, right? What happens if that fails? So let's say it didn't go that way. Hypothetically, the kid grabbed a backpack after the shot was fired and he ran out. Whole different story, right? But if the teacher is confident that he has the situation under control, the weapon's been separated from the child, their child's not going to run out and can't do anything else, then is there a need? Here's the other part of that: is right now in this scenario in my head, what is happening? Shot gets fired in the classroom, irregardless of how it gets fired off in the classroom. The teacher is now evacuating everybody, right? He's separating. Kudos, good move for this situation. That, and I'm not going to second guess that move, because you're separating, and you know that from his perspective, he has time to do that and so forth, right? But there's a lot of things happening: securing the kid, securing the backpack, evacuating 28, 29 other third graders in an orderly fashion that are in this circumstance. Probably needs help. What's the best way to get that? Hit a panic button.
Yeah.
Hit an alert, right? So then people are going to start trying to figure out what's going on, and you're working through it, understanding that the threat is contained, but you're still working through it, and you're going to need help and you're going to need to notify people, hey, I just had a gun go off in my classroom. And then after everything calms down, then you can start releasing the alerts and making sure everything is good, right? So
So, like, in this situation, you were just saying, like, in that situation, it'd be okay to press a panic button to get help,
sure,
right?
sure.
So, if you're using a panic button that just says lockdown, and it's kind of that alert function is almost recognized as a active shooter
Hmm.
alert.
Hmm.
Like, guess what happens? You're getting police showing up with guns drawn, basically looking for an active shooter.
Sure.
So let's think for a moment. What if you had the ability to send that alert and then also be able to communicate back and forth and say, hey, just so you know, I press this because I just want to make sure that all the students in my room are good to go. No one was actually, hit, but it was an accidental discharge from what I'm seeing. Everything's contained. I have the student in question. You know, to have that information would be so much better than having a whole bunch of people come in and looking for what they think is someone roaming the halls, right? So that this
Sure.
is where like having two-way communication would be like
Fantastic, right?
so much better. I just want to put that out.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But here's the deal, and I'm not disagreeing with what you say.
Yeah.
The issue becomes task management right now. And pressing the button to get help there to manage the chaos in that classroom is more important than communicating what is happening,
Right.
right? Because in everyone's mind right now, the isolation of the shooter has occurred, and the panic is meant, the panic buttons, panic badges, panic whatever panics you have, the panic button universally is what we'll call it, is meant to get help immediately there. If that panic button is pressed, somebody comes to help, which is the whole idea of having a panic button. They'll know where it is and so forth, right? Is once you get an idea of what is happening procedurally and in your training and your tabletops, you have to slow the train down, because that panic button is releasing just this huge train of resources that is coming at you. Law enforcement, because of what you said earlier, you have all of these people coming in to help you, and they have a mindset. The situation and situational awareness of what is going on, once you find out what is happening and that it has resolved itself, essentially, you need to make that phone call to 911. Hey, this is so and so. We just had, and I don't like the word accidental,
Okay.
negligent.
Sure. Okay, that's
The
probably a
kids
better
the
way to put
kids
it.
saying accidental, but there was a finger or something in there that caused that gun to go off.
Sure. Sure.
The gun itself was present, so that's an issue. Third
Yeah.
grader,
That's the I think the bigger issue, but yeah.
right? So that's an issue, right? The issue is we have to slow the train down as quickly as we can, understanding the number of resources that we have asked for in a panic button situation. And by the way, that's your false alarm procedure as well.
Mm,
If somebody actually presses the button and they, let's say they were asking for a staff assist and hit the wrong button, right? Or they pressed the wrong number of clicks depending on the button, but accidentally initiate a panic. There's a moment where you have to figure out, was it a righteous alert or accidental or false alarm? Then once you determine that it's not an active event, you need to call the law enforcement 911 and say, hey, we have no indications that there's an active shooter here, active violence. But what we have to do is calm things down, change the mindset of those who are responding to us, and say, okay, we're headed to an active shooter alarm, but we're getting information that it may not be, or if it was, it's completely under control. no more suspects, no more. So it was witness. There is one person. That person is under control. We have isolated the weapon, separated the weapon from the student. Everything is good. Calm it down. If we're mistaken on that, because we don't know everything that's happening right now, if we're mistaken on that, bring it in. It's the same type of call that needs to occur in a swatting situation where it's a false report of shooters. Now, law enforcement should have a set protocol for verifying that something is happening, not just showing up at the school in this all out mindset. Ever since I became a cop back in the day, bank robberies, we get a bank alarm. 80% of them were false. We'd always start responding, and somebody would call into the bank, and the bank had safe words or what have you, but we could validate whether or not there was a bank robbery occurring. That should be something that the schools work out with their law enforcement people. They need to have a contact person at each school, at least one, probably two or three, so that if they get a direct call from the public, not through the alarm,
Mm,
because not everyone has the ability to activate an alarm at a school.
sure.
If somebody's calling 911 direct and you're only receiving one call, that's a red flag or green flag. I don't know what color flag it is. It's a flag that you need to
Yeah.
address. If you get one call during an active shooter or any shooting, that's something that usually doesn't happen. Even
Yeah,
in the
usually you're getting a
community,
whole
you
bunch.
usually get 10, 15 calls, and getting one is is suspicious.
Yeah.
Getting one email, getting one whatever, or you're getting an email with no call, those things are suspicious. But there should be ways to validate whether or not you have something coming. And then, I mean, you can, in a swatting call, issue a lockdown. There's no harm in that. It's an unplanned drill. Issue a lockdown and then say, okay, if the 911 dispatchers are calling and saying, hey, we just received this report. Is anything going on? We're not aware of anything, but let's put it in lockdown. Everyone go into a lockdown. Now things are isolated, stationary, contained, and now we can figure it out. Now we have time. We're buying time to figure things out. And if nothing happens, nothing is going on, then we can have that discussion with our first responders and move on with the rest of the day and call it an unplanned drill.
I thought that was a very interesting situation.
Mm-hmm. It's a good one.
That'd be kind of an interesting, tabletop, I think, for other schools to do, based off a real world scenario.
You know how I feel about tabletops.
You love tabletops.
I love tabletops, and I love
Kelly
taking.
eats tabletops for breakfast.
Oh, it makes it sound like I have a high fiber diet, but I do. I love them. I think they're underutilized, and taking scenarios like this into your school and just sitting down and talking about it, probably one of the best things that we can do. Probably one of the best things that we can do to help us create a mindset, a culture about how we respond to things. And I'll leave this conversation with this. I commend the teacher for doing what they did. I just wanted, as we're talking through that, there's options and things that you can consider. The outcome in this one was ended up being fantastic. I think there were no injuries. Am I right?
Yeah, I didn't see any reports of any injuries, but I will add to this and say the two parents did end up getting charged both with a misdemeanor off of this for
Access.
having access to a loaded firearm in the house.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, so that's a new law that just passed for this year in Virginia that if I remember correctly, they had a
mm,
kind of a lesser law. It was only a I'm going to mess this up, but this is my understanding. It was only a crime if the access caused injury.
Interesting.
Recently, especially I think because Virginia had the 6-year-old a year or two earlier, the kindergartner that shot the kindergarten teacher in the hand. And at that time, I think they charged the parent, but the whole controversy was never should have had access, period.
Yeah.
And
uh,
that's just responsible gun ownership, to be
yeah.
honest with you,
Yes.
is having access, limiting access. If you're not going to have it locked up, then you need to have control of that weapon.
Yes.
So
100%. Do you want me to talk about the other event that happened in the same county today?
we can, except for if we do, we're probably not going to. We can talk about it real quick, but we're not going to have much time for the main topic. So ask away.
Well, I guess I'll just be real quick about it. It's that in the same county, so today, within the same week, we had a shooting that there was what, three
It was the
people
next day, actually. Yeah.
the
So
next
one
day.
was,
So the next
yeah.
day, three people got killed and three people were injured. So that county's going through some stuff. Oh my goodness.
Unfortunate set of events, right? It was not school related. The schools, and I think one was a county school and one was a city school, but it can show how the events within the community can impact the behavior of the schools, right? And so we had this mass shooting. It was after school hours, wasn't on campus. As far as I can tell, wasn't school related in any aspect. But the schools near the incident had to postpone or delay school from starting a couple of hours so that they could get resources into the schools to address the affected children, impacts to the children and teachers within the schools from this incident that occurred after hours, the night before. I had a similar incident when I worked for the school district where we had a domestic violence thing where the husband there was a fight that escalated to where he shot and killed his wife during essentially a block party for this apartment complex. And so that's a completely unrelated to school activity event. But because there were so many children present, we had to provide support and counseling and services to like 8 or 9 different schools because kids from that complex there were high school kids, middle school kids, charter school kids, elementary school kids that went to different elementary schools. So it was pretty impactful for the schools, understandably. But you add on top of this, the day before, we had a third grader who discharged a weapon in an elementary school in a nearby school district. That's going to heighten people's
Hmm.
alert. They're going to be more sensitive to these things. Again, I think they responded correctly on this and providing support and so forth. That's what good districts do. But it just can show you how community events and incidences can impact the schools. And I get it. Schools are the center of our communities and our micro communities, our neighborhoods. Everyone in that city is impacted some way by the activities that are going on at the schools.
All right. So we will move on to the main topic,
Mm-hmm.
and that is threat assessment versus threat response. It's a very interesting topic there. So tell me, Kelly, what's the difference between threat assessment and threat response?
So the reason I wanted to talk about this, I mean, on the surface, you would think, oh, that's pretty straightforward.
You want to know my real high level take?
Sure.
is that you're almost essentially doing the same thing for each one, but one of them you have a lot more time with the threat assessment and a lot more opportunities to intervene. And then threat response is all the things that you could have learned in threat assessment, you now have to learn in a very small, short window.
Okay, let's
Something
go with
like
that.
that.
Let's go
Yeah,
with that.
that's my
So,
take.
yeah, so the reason I wanted to talk about this is because we're in this phase. Thank you to the Left of Bang authors, Patrick Van Horn and Jason Riley. But we're going through this Left of Bang phase at Crisis Go because it's important that we try to stay on the left side of Bang, Bang being the initiator of the incident, right? And we try to stay there. I think there's some confusion as to the need to do threat assessments before you respond. And we can see in the article that we talked about today, there was no time to do a threat assessment on that third grader.
Hmm.
That threat was there. The
No.
information that you're learning about your threat was the sound of a gun going off,
Yeah.
right? So the real issue is, and I don't want to get into how to do a threat assessment
Mhm.
or how to respond, but the real issue that I am seeing is the confusion of transitioning from a threat assessment or gathering information to an actual response.
Like
If
when do you
when to
actually
do
take
that,
action?
when should you take
Yeah.
action? So, and just to go over real quick, so if you haven't heard our threat assessment podcast, go back to the beginning, and
Way back.
there was plenty of those there,
Yeah.
those conversations. But what we're really trying to do is, if you look at the pathway to violence, there are several steps, and the starting at the bottom is the initial victimization, and then it works its way up through these 6 or 7 steps to where somebody is attacking you, right? So what you're trying to do is, if you get a threat, is you're trying to place that person on that pathway to violence to see and determine what level and the immediacy of that threat. So that's a threat assessment. The other part of the threat assessment is, if you're able to prevent the act from occurring, is what are the interventions? What do you need to do to prevent that from going the next day after that, and etc. So what are the appropriate interventions? So the purpose of a threat assessment: identify whether or not a valid threat is posed, the level of the threat that is posed, and what are the proper interventions. And what we just talked about in the first half of this podcast was threat response. Our responding to a threat. Our job is to stop the killing, stop the dying, start the recovery. What I'm asking people to do, and what I am suggesting that they do, is in their threat assessment process, they need to establish thresholds. And those thresholds, if they are met, they escalate an action, they trigger an action. If we get to here, we're going to do this, this, and this. If we get a step higher, well, maybe we're going to get law enforcement involved. If we get a step higher, we're going to press a button, right? So look at the levels that you determine and what your actions are going to be. Because at some point, when we've always, not always, we often talk about laying those bricks in the wall. We have a bunch of bricks which represent different pieces of information and that you've gathered as part of your assessment. And you're looking and you're saying, yeah, I don't really have a threat now, or It's not a very high threat or whatever. But at some point, you're going to put a brick in there. And even though you don't have this very high level, you're going to say, we need to do something. You need to determine what those actions are beforehand. Don't just go in and say, okay, let's figure this out. We need to figure out, if we reach here, what is our next action? And as we step our way up, we escalate those actions. Maybe some of it is notification to your district leadership, the safety team. Maybe some of it is getting police involved. Maybe some of it is actually removing going and grabbing the student and finding the kid and isolating them and bring an investigation into, maybe a criminal investigation into the fold. But that's also going to say, if I receive a threat, do I press the panic button? Do I initiate a lockdown? We've been talking about this case. I'm just going to leave it at that. This case where the panic button was pushed after the shots were fired, but they had information before. And so there's things that we have some information. And as soon as we receive any information, your first thought is, do I need to press the button? Right? Do I need to press the button? It'll be pretty obvious as to whether or not you need to press that button. But if you're saying, I don't know, maybe not, well, then let's take a step back. Now, where does it meet on our pathway? Where does it, how imminent is this? How much in danger are we? Maybe I don't hit the panic button. Maybe I just hit a lockdown and try to buy myself some time to find the child and isolate them and start an investigation. Maybe that's what I need to do. If I can do that, and I have done that, then maybe I take it a step back. Now I'm starting to do the investigation. I found the kid, I've isolated them. We're doing our investigation. Now I'm buying a lot more time. And that's what we're trying to do. But like we said, in the case of the Virginia third grader who fired a shot, that's immediate.
Yeah,
That's a response.
There's like a line of like definitive, like,
yeah,
for sure, this is where you're hitting the button. And like, I think like within the industry, I think we all know, like, you hear gunfire, I think everyone agrees you should be hitting the panic button. Obviously, this other article we did was slightly different, but yeah.
The reality is, and you can read this in Left of Bang, but the reality is generally speaking, we're very quick when it's absolute, either something's happening or something's not happening.
Yeah, it's
right,
kind of black and white there, but
what's that?
It's kind of like a black and white situation, right?
Yeah, black and white, right?
And
we like this
definitively, okay, all right. So now it's like we have this gray area of, okay, but what if? Do we need to hear shots fired to press the panic button?
That's what we're getting at.
I don't think so.
Yeah, so the yes and no are black and white.
Yes.
Yeah, I don't need to do it. I do need to do it.
Yeah.
Our issues in the response to a threat always occur in the gray area because we always start second guessing ourselves. But if you receive a threat and your first question in your mind is, do I need to press the panic button? If that's always your first question, it is easier to de-escalate than saying, nope, I don't need to do it because X, Y, and Z. It's always easier to de-escalate than it is to escalate, because escalation requires you to work through problems and check boxes and so forth. But if you start at the worst case scenario, it's easier to say, okay, that's not happening. That's not happening. And then you say, okay, I don't need to do this right now, because your yes, I need to press the button is clear, is very clear. I need to press the button right now.
So let me try to like put this into a scenario. So like let's say you get a report of a threat. Let's say you get it through a tip line and you say, is there a potential that this could result in a shooting at my school?
Hmm.
And you say, yes, there is that potential.
Hmm.
So based on what you said, that means it's easier to just say press the button. That's what you mean by like de-escalation, like you start from the top. But then if you get the tip and you say, is this tip something that's going to result in a shooting, and you're like, based on what I have, there's no way. Like the tip didn't involve a gun. Let's say that.
Hmm.
Okay. All right. So that's out of the question. Next, is it going to involve this? No. Okay. So then you're saying it's easier to kind of work down from there rather than saying, oh well, only this could happen, but could it do this? Maybe, but it could do this. And is that what you're saying? Like go
Yeah.
from
So
bottom up. I'm trying to put in like a real world kind of scenario.
let's talk about our objective overall in anything safety is we're trying to reduce or eliminate the reactionary gap,
Mm,
right?
yep.
And we have to look at what are the worst case scenarios when we're talking about reduce. If we receive a threat, what's the worst that could happen if I'm wrong here? Not just potential, because there's lots of potential, but what's the worst case scenario? If I choose not to press this button, what's the worst that could happen? If you say somebody could walk in that door and shoot me, then there's some sort of action that's required.
Yeah.
But just receiving a threat, because I have to address this, just receiving a threat doesn't mean the potential. It means, does the threat information that I have warrant action? So when you look at the threat, we're going to use quotes there. You receive a threat. What is the information that is contained in there? You know, right now there's nothing happening out there. Some call just said, "Hey, there's going to be a shooting today." Okay, is it right then that you press the button? I don't know that that's the case, right? But you have to start looking at, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Well, there's nothing happening, so I have a very small amount of time. Do I know who it is? Who's making the threat? Who's threatening? You know, sometimes you get anonymous calls saying, "Hey, little Johnny's going to," or so forth. Do we know where that person is? Do we know that he's on campus or off campus? Do we know where, if he's on campus, where that's supposed to be at this time? Do I have the opportunity? If he's on campus and you're getting this sort of information, it might be a time to press the button because now we have to isolate and buy time. We might go to little Johnny and find him, isolate him, start an investigation, then that's great. But if you can't find him and you can't isolate him and you can't do any investigation, you might need to press a button. That button might just be at this point a lockdown because there's no active event going on. It depends on the information you have, but that's why you need to establish thresholds. And what we're doing is we're, instead of building up to pressing the button, we want that first thought to be press the button and sort of build yourself down from the button, if that makes sense.
Right. It's like, is there any reason to not press this button?
That's right. Yeah, and that's a good point
Yeah.
because when we do threat assessments, when I was doing threat assessments for the school district, people ask, "How do you know how to do this?" And I said, "Well, law enforcement does threat assessments every day, not formal ones like this, but we look at individuals and say, is that person a threat to me or not?" Is there a reason for me to contact that person?
Mm.
No. Okay. And this is some of the stuff that we train our new officers, because new officers out of the academy don't have the experience. So as a field training officer, I would have my trainee, I would have them start looking at people in the public and identifying and focusing on a person. And I would start asking questions. Why did you focus on that person? Should you contact them? No. Why not? And have them explain why that person doesn't warrant. If they couldn't justify not contacting that person, we would go make a contact. Hey, how are you doing? What are you up to today? And just start talking, a
Hmm.
consensual contact, right? If they didn't want to talk to us, we'd move on. But it's working through that and saying, is that person a threat to me? And we're doing the same thing. We're starting at the top and we're trying to work our way down, as opposed to, I'm going to wait till that person does something wrong. So we're moving away from that response mode, is what we're
Hmm.
trying to do. Right.
It almost sounds like you're being a little more proactive.
Right.
I just want to chime in here for a second.
Sure.
When we're talking about threat, like you're not always just talking about like someone shooting a gun or something, right? Like we can look at it more of a broad,
Sure.
like, is this person or student, whoever it is it like a
Peace and
bullying
order.
situation? Right? Is it like just a simple, more? I mean, I won't say simple, but like less.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's not as high craziness as shooting, but like talking about a bullying thing. Like, is this?
But here's the deal. If you always start at the top, you will end up working your way down to the intent, or the level, right? If you always start at the top and you're walking down the hallway and
Hmm.
you're doing the same thing and you're saying, okay, and the more you do it, the quicker this becomes, and it almost becomes natural. Just it becomes natural to you and your process. Is everyone understands, you walk into a school and let's say they've been in session for a couple of months, whether it's the fall session or the spring session. They've been in session for a couple of months. You walk in and you've, over that month or two period, you've established a normal feel, a vibe for that school. You know what, everyone's kind of, they're in their routine, everyone's moving and so forth, right? And then you walk in one day and something's off.
Hmm.
Something is not right,
Okay.
right? And now you've sensed, your spidey senses have come up. Now you're saying, something's going on here. So now we start looking at why. What is the activity? Looking around, are there kids that aren't doing what they normally do? Avoiding an area, being pulled to an area. Maybe there's a fight going on. Maybe there's some excitement. I used to see this in law enforcement, not directly, but indirectly. I used to see it like right after spring break or right after Christmas or winter break, but where you would get an increase in calls to the school, especially in spring break in Southern California. We would see an increase in disruptive activity at the high schools and stuff after spring break, increase in fighting, increase in criminal activity on campus, gang fights, gang activity. We would see those almost cyclically. But you get the idea, okay, everyone be ready. We're going to start getting some reports. Spring break is over. Let's start being proactive here and maybe taking a walk through campus or what have you. People can sense that. But if you start at the top and you justify, you say, okay, do I need to press the button? Do I need to contact that kid? Why do I need to contact them? What's going on? Why is my attention drawn to them? Let's start investigating that. And at some point,
Mm.
we might de-escalate down to, I think that kid's being bullied, right? I think that kid's bullying somebody. There seems to be a power swing over there. You know, that sort of, it's hard for me to describe, but you know it when you see it. Something's going on that's not good in that area. Let's go and observe. Let's maybe go in and intervene. Let's grab a kid by the shirt collar and say, what the hell are you doing? You know, those types of things. But until we start getting that idea, let's start at the top and work our way down. Because if we start at the top and we validate our feelings, our intuition, if you want to say that, our reasoning for being drawn to that area, if we start there and we end there, it's pretty obvious,
Mm.
right? What we
Okay.
need to do. But as you step back, then your interventions decrease. At the same time, you're trying to figure out exactly what's going on. And at some point, you might discover the victim
Mm.
of bullying, right? You might discover something else. But if you start here, you do what we often talked about and say, huh, that's just schoolyard, elementary school behavior. But if you ask yourself, is that a threat? No. Is there violence going on over there? No. Oh, there looks like a power struggle. Who's exerting the power? Oh, little Johnny. Okay, I'm going to pick up little Johnny. What's his deal? Oh, he's probably bullying somebody. Who's the victim? Right? And then you start identifying more bully situations as opposed to starting at the bottom and saying, hey, there's something going on. Let's go figure it out.
Hmm.
Is this a threat area? And a threat of what? What kind of violence? Any kind of violence. Fighting, threatening, so forth, right? And then we start working our way down, and you're more likely to stop at the appropriate level if you de-escalate than if you escalate, because you're going to start justifying some of the actions until you make it clear what's happening. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense to
Yeah.
me. I get it.
Yeah. That's what we're trying to do. And that assessment process allows us to reduce that reactionary gap. Before, we've defined our thresholds and the actions to be taken during that threshold if we meet that threshold. So let's start at the top. And then if we stop there, then we immediately know what our actions should be because we've already predefined those all the way down. And as soon as you land on a level, then you're sitting and going, okay, I know what to do here. And it just makes the whole process so much easier, quicker, and although I don't have any data on this, probably more accurate because you're being thoughtful about that process and you're gaining experience throughout. And this is something you should be doing every day, is looking through the behavior. You have a baseline. You've already started with a baseline. So, and there are kids in your school, and every kid in your school has a baseline. Overall, there is a baseline. That's the feel that you get when you walk into the school. But there are other kids in there that have every kid has their own baseline. Does this take getting to know your kids? Absolutely. But this is where you start seeing groups. You start seeing individuals that are being picked on or that are maybe were outgoing at one point that are no longer associating with that group. If you had a close group and then all of a sudden one kid's isolated from that group, talk to the kid. Hey, what happened? You guys, what's going on? Oh, they just don't like me anymore. What happened?
Yeah.
Why?
What happened to cause that?
What's going on? I shared this with you 2 weeks ago, I think it was now. I was just on social media and there was a TikTok that was on my Instagram. It was about a dance trend. And there was a group of cheerleaders. And this one is the young lady that posted this. And she said, I wasn't allowed to participate in the the group who was doing the same trend. So her cheerleading team was doing the trend and they wouldn't let her do it. So she decided, I'm going to go over and do my own and I'm
Mm.
going to post that. Good on her. But now we need to ask, well, what happened? Here's a team that you're supposed to be on. And why are you not there? Who told you you couldn't be there?
Yeah,
The bully is who
was
told her. Whoever that
yeah,
is,
yeah.
it's the person who says, I don't like you anymore. I don't. And then we need to have discussions with every member of that cheerleading team. It's those types of things that allow us, if we're doing this all of the time and we sit there and go, oh, we're at a basketball game and you have 6 cheerleaders sitting on the bench at one side during the game and then one that's 5 feet away, there's something going on there. But that's the same with any sport, any group. Why aren't you going to chess club anymore? I don't like it. Why? Get into the why. It might be something I just lost interest. But until you ask, you're not going to figure it out. So the bottom line is you have to look at your processes and create your thresholds and then start working from the highest level or the highest potential and work your way down and you'll determine your proper level pretty quick. It's much easier to do that, much quicker to do it that way. And then you're going to also reduce that reactionary gap should you find something that is actionable. You're going to know because it's going to be trained into you. It's a fairly simple process, probably much easier if you read Left of Bang because there's a lot more about human behaviors and how this process isn't specific to an ethnicity, a race, a gender, a society, a culture. It's based upon human response that is natural human response, like any other thing, like everyone has it's universal. So it's like smiling, right?
Mm.
If you smile, it doesn't matter what culture you're in. You know what that means. If you're laughing, you know what that means.
Yeah. In most cases.
If there's positive, and sometimes the way you laugh means something
Yeah,
universally,
that's true. And get
right?
real detailed with it.
But if you can identify positive, you can identify negative. Nervousness, being attached to somebody, following somebody, leading somebody. You can see who has the power in a group. You can see who is subordinate in that group. Just takes some work and understanding, but this is how we take a huge step forward in preventing violence.
That's for sure.
Being aware of our surroundings, situationally aware of the normal behavior of our school, and if something's off, who is it, what are they doing, and why do they draw my attention to them.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. And if you have any questions about what we discussed, leave a comment on our website at crisisgo.com. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you next time on Coffee with Kelly, a discussion on school safety.